The coin
You
felt
have to
cold and
go.
insulting in her palm.
Now.
What
20
is it?
silver dollars
Tell
pressed there
those.
by Clayton Hayes, the last man she'd called family. His face wore that peculiar mask men adopt when they've done something shameful but necessary, a tight grimace dressed up as sympathy. It's all that's left, Eleanor. The claim is sold to Mr. Blackwood. You should head east to your sister in Philadelphia. His voice carried the flat finality of a
There
man
we
who'd already
are.
moved on. There's nothing for you here. Eleanor Hayes
That
stood in the
should
dusty square
do.
of Mercy Falls, Montana, aware of the eyes upon her. September 1883 had brought an early chill of the high country, and the wind cut through her black morning dress like it had every right to. She was 29 years old, a widow of 2 months, alone in a town that had already written her epitaph. Clayton wouldn't meet her gaze. Behind him, his wife sat straight-backed on their loaded wagon, mouth pursed in righteous disapproval. They'd sold her husband's land, taken the money, and now they were leaving her with pocket change and pity. The good people of Mercy Falls watched with the patient interest of vultures. They expected tears, pleading perhaps, maybe a dramatic collapse. Eleanor gave them none of it. Her fingers closed around the coins, feeling their weight, their inadequacy, their insult. Then she felt something else, the folded paper in her coat pocket, the deed, still in her possession despite everything Clayton had done. You sold land you don't own, Clayton. Her voice cut through the square's murmur like a blade through silk. Clayton's face went white, then red. His hands twitched toward his coat, patting pockets that no longer held what he thought was safely transferred. That's your problem now, he managed, but his voice had lost its certainty. Good luck explaining it to Blackwood. He climbed onto the wagon with unseemly haste. His wife snapped the reins before he'd even settled. Within moments they were gone, dust devils marking their retreat like the signatures of cowards. Eleanor stood alone in the center of town. The watching faces shifted, uncertain now. She'd been a problem requiring charity. Now she was something else entirely, something they couldn't quite define. She turned her back on all of them and began walking west, toward 300 acres of rock and scrub and failure, toward the massive corpse of a lightning-struck cottonwood tree that marked land everyone knew was worthless, toward the only thing in this world that truly belonged to her. The walk stretched 6 miles through country that didn't care whether she lived or died. Eleanor carried everything she owned in a canvas bag slung across her shoulder. 2 dresses, a photograph of William, the deed that made her against all logic a landowner, and 20 silver dollars that wouldn't last a month. The September sun pressed down like a hand on her back, pushing her forward or holding her in place. She couldn't tell which. Her boots raised small clouds of dust with each step, and she watched them settle, thinking about how quickly the land reclaimed everything, how fast a person could disappear out here. She thought about Philadelphia, her sister's cramped apartment at above the bakery, the look in Mary's eyes when she'd written after William's death, that mixture of sympathy and superiority that said, I told you the frontier was no place for a woman. She could go back, become someone's dependent again, trade this hard freedom for soft captivity. The thought made her hands curl into fists. William had brought her west 3 years ago, fresh from their wedding in Philadelphia. She'd been 26, city, soft, terrified of the vast emptiness. But William had a dream. Land, independence, a future they'd build together. She remembered the first time he'd shown her the Montana territory on a map, his finger tracing the unmarked spaces. That's where possibility lives, Ellie, where people like us can make something. She'd believed him because she loved him, followed him because she trusted him. And when the cough started, when it became clear his lungs were failing, she'd nursed him through 8 months of slow dying because she'd promised him forever. He'd promised her forever too, but forever had lasted only 3 years. When Eleanor reached the property line marked by nothing but a cairn of stones William had stacked 18 months ago, she stopped. Before her lay exactly what everyone said: worthless ground. Too rocky for farming, too dry for decent grazing, scattered with sage and scrub oak that clung to life through sheer stubbornness. And there, rising from the earth like the ribs of some enormous beast, the fallen cottonwood. The tree must have been magnificent once. Its trunk was thick as a wagon, its length stretching 40 feet across the ground. Lightning had split it from crown to root years before William bought the land, and when it fell, it had torn a crater in the earth. The root ball stood vertical, a wall of twisted wood and trapped soil 7 feet high. The cavity it left behind gaped like an open mouth. Eleanor slid down into the hollow, her boots finding purchase on packed earth. The air here was different, cooler. It smelled of deep stone and damp clay, of things hidden and waiting. The massive trunk overhead created a natural roof, solid and thick. And there, tucked against the base of the root wall, she found them. William's marks. 3 stones stacked in a deliberate cairn. Beneath them, a piece of weathered board with letters carved deep. E, start here. The earth provides. W. Eleanor's breath caught. Her fingers traced the letters, feeling where William's knife had cut them. He'd known. Known she'd come here. Known she'd keep her promise. Known she'd need this message. She pulled the board free and found something else beneath. A letter wrapped in oilcloth, preserved against time and weather. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. William's handwriting, shaky from fever, but still legible. My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I left you alone in this hard world, but I didn't leave you with nothing. That land is more than dirt and rock. It's possibility. The limestone will make your bricks stronger than any in the territory. The spring will never freeze. The clay is pure. I found these things by accident, but I bought the land on purpose. For you. For your future. I know what people will say. That a woman can't make it alone. Prove them wrong, Ellie. You're stronger than you know. Build something. Make this land yours. And when you sit by your fire in the home you built with your own hands, know that I'm proud of you. All my love, William. The letter blurred. Eleanor read it 3 times before she allowed herself to cry. Not the broken sobs of despair, but something fiercer. Grief mixed with gratitude, mixed with a determination so sharp it felt like anger. She remembered the day William had come home from his exploration of the property, his eyes bright despite the cough rattling in his chest. I walked every inch today, Ellie. Found things. Good things. He'd been too weak to explain fully, but he'd made her promise. Keep the land, no matter what Clayton says, no matter what anyone says. Promise me. She'd promised, not understanding. Now sitting in the pit that would become her home, holding his final letter, she understood everything. William hadn't abandoned her. He'd armed her, given her the tools for survival disguised as worthless dirt. That first night, Eleanor didn't build a fire. She curled into the curve of the roots wrapped in her thin shawl and let the darkness settle around her like a familiar coat. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Around her, the night sounds of the high plains sang their endless song. Somewhere distant, a wolf called. Closer, the wind whispered secrets to the sage. She pressed her hand flat against the earth beneath her. This ground had held William's bones until she'd buried him in the town cemetery. Now it would hold her, not as a grave, but as a foundation. This is my ground now, she whispered to the darkness, the only thing in this world that's truly mine. And with that declaration, Eleanor Hayes stopped being a victim of circumstance and became something else. Something harder. Something the frontier would have to reckon with. Dawn came cold and clear. Eleanor woke with her muscles stiff and her resolve harder than the clay she'd soon be moving. She found William's old spade where he'd left it, leaning against the root wall. The handle was worn smooth, the blade nicked and rusted, but still solid. She positioned herself exactly where William had marked and drove the spade down. The first few inches gave way easily, rich dark loam that compressed under her boots. But then she hit the clay layer. Dense, rust red, hard as stone that hadn't quite made up its mind. Eleanor learned the rhythm through pain. Drive the spade down with her boot heel, feeling the impact jar up through her leg. Rock it back and forth, loosening the earth's grip. Pry up a chunk. Scoop it into the fraying burlap sack William had left. Drag the sack to the surface, muscles screaming. Dump it 50 paces away so it wouldn't slide back in. Return, repeat. By noon of the first day, her palms had raised blisters. By evening, they'd burst and bled. By the second day, they'd begun to callous. By the third, her hands had transformed into something else entirely. Tools of survival, hardened and capable. The work consumed her completely. Every shovelful was a small victory. Every bucket of clay removed was proof she could do this. Her world narrowed to the scrape of metal on earth, the burn in her shoulders, the rhythmic dance of dig and lift and dump. She learned to read the ground, to feel where it would give and where it would resist. learned to work with the land instead of against it. At night, she'd collapse onto the pile of pine boughs she'd gathered for a bed, too exhausted to think. But in the moments before sleep claimed her, she'd look at her bleeding hands and feel something close to pride. These were the hands of a builder now, a survivor. She was digging more than a shelter. She was excavating her future one shovelful at a time. The fourth day brought a new kind of pain. Not the sharp agony of fresh blisters, but the deep ache of muscles pushed beyond their limits. Eleanor's entire body had become a catalog of suffering. Her lower back seized when she bent. Her calves cramped at night, waking her with jolts of agony that left her gasping. Her grip on the spade handle was so weak by midday that she had to wrap her hands in strips torn from her spare dress just to hold on. The simple act of lifting the spade became a negotiation with her body. Her shoulders would scream in protest. Her spine would threaten to give. Her legs would shake under the weight of a half-filled sack. But she kept digging, because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering that she was a 29-year-old widow with no skills marketable in town, no money beyond those dwindling silver dollars, and no future anyone in Mercy Falls could imagine for her. Digging was simpler. Digging was something she could control. Each shovelful was a choice. She made a small act of defiance against the voices that said she couldn't. On the fifth day, Eleanor discovered something unexpected. The pain didn't get worse. It plateaued. Her body pushed past what she thought were its limits, had adapted. Found new reserves. The blisters on her palms had become thick calluses. The ache in her back had settled into a dull, manageable throb. Her muscles, though exhausted, had learned the movements so thoroughly that they worked almost automatically. She was becoming something she'd never been before. Strong, capable, self-reliant in a way that went beyond merely doing tasks. She was learning that her body could endure far more than her mind believed possible. And with that discovery came a dangerous kind of confidence. If she could do this, what else might be possible? On the third day, the spade struck something different, a seam of softer rock running along what would become the back wall. Eleanor dropped to her knees, scraping away clay with her fingers. The stone was pale, almost white, chalky. When she pressed her thumbnail into it, it left a mark. Limestone. Exactly where William said it would be. Eleanor sat back on her heels, understanding flooding through her like cold water. William had found this, had tested it, had known what it meant. Limestone mixed with clay made mortar. Mortar strong enough to bind bricks that would outlast wood, outlast time. "You left me a gift," she whispered to his memory, "a way to build, a way to survive." She spent the rest of that day carefully excavating round the limestone seam, preserving it, understanding that it was as valuable as gold. More valuable, perhaps, because gold couldn't build shelter or create income, but limestone could do both. That night, by the light of a small fire she'd finally allowed herself, Eleanor began to plan. Not just survival, creation. The September rains came in the second week, and with them revelation. Eleanor watched water cascade down a natural fissure in the rock face behind her growing shelter. Instead of cursing it, she studied it, traced its path, understood its potential. She spent 2 days digging a channel, lining it with flat stones she pried from the hillside. The channel guided water away from her shelter down into a deep pit she'd excavated. She coated the inside of that pit with clay, pounding it smooth with a flat rock until it was nearly waterproof. The work was backbreaking. Her shoulders burned, her legs trembled from squatting for hours. But she'd learned something crucial in her weeks of digging. Pain was temporary. What she built would last. The next rain filled the pit with clean, cold water. Eleanor cupped her hands and drank. The water tasted of stone and sky. It was the first system she'd built, the first problem she'd solved, not with money or help, but with observation and effort. Standing there with wet hands and a full water cache, she felt something shift in Maud here. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. By the end of the third week, her shelter had taken real shape. The main chamber was 8 feet deep, 10 feet wide, tall enough to stand in near the center. The walls were a patchwork of packed earth and strategically placed stones, and the massive cottonwood trunk overhead kept the rain out. And she discovered that natural chimney, a crack in the rock that drew smoke up and away when she built her small cooking fires. The wire she'd bought with her precious dollars became snares, simple loops hidden along game trails. For 3 days, they caught nothing. On the fourth morning, a rabbit. Eleanor killed it quickly the way William had taught her during their first winter, when game had been scarce and every meal precious. Honor the animal by using everything. Meat for 2 days, hide for tanning, bones for broth. Nothing wasted, nothing taken for granted. She was learning the language of self-reliance word by word, day by day. The visitor arrived on a night when the smell of roasting rabbit filled the air around her small fire. Eleanor heard it before she saw it, a shuffle in the darkness, a presence at the edge of the light. The dog was more skeleton than animal. Matted fur hung from protruding ribs, but its eyes still held intelligence, and when it looked at her, Eleanor saw something she recognized: desperation, loneliness, the particular hope of creatures who've lost everything but refuse to die. Her first instinct was practical. She had barely enough for herself, but the dog didn't move closer, didn't beg. It simply stood there shivering, waiting for permission or rejection. Eleanor tore off a piece of meat and threw it. The dog caught it midair, swallowed it whole, and took one hesitant step forward. "That's all I have," Eleanor said. Her voice was rough from disuse. She spoke so rarely now, mainly to herself or to William's memory. But she didn't chase the dog away. It lay down just outside the firelight, a watchful shadow. In the morning, it was still there. "All right then," Eleanor said, studying the animal. Its fur was ash gray where it wasn't matted with dirt. "You're ash, because you rose from the ashes of your old life, just like me." The dog's tail moved, just once, but it was enough. Over the following days, Ash moved closer, ate the scraps Eleanor shared, followed her on her rounds, checking snares and gathering wood. Never barked, as if understanding that silence was survival out here. Eleanor found herself talking to the dog as she worked, explaining what she was doing, why she was doing it. The sound of her own voice became a comfort, a reminder that she was still human, still connected to the world of language and meaning. At night, Ash curled near her feet, a warm anchor in the darkness. And for the first time since William's death, Eleanor didn't feel entirely alone. "We'll survive together," she told the dog one evening, scratching behind its ears. "Two outcasts making a home where no one thought we could." Ash pressed against her legs, solid and real. Eleanor realized she'd been given another gift. Not from William this time, but from whatever force governed the wilderness. Companionship, purpose beyond herself. She had someone to live for again. The sky turned the color of old bruises and stayed that way. The air grew heavy, pressing down like a hand. Eleanor had seen enough Montana weather to read the warning. A storm was coming, and not a gentle one. She spent the day hauling wood, stacking it inside the shelter until she could barely move. Secured the canvas over the entrance with stones and stakes. Checked the water cache, the food stores, the precious few tools that stood between her and oblivion. When the rain began, it wasn't rain at all. It was a wall of water falling from a sky that had split open. For the first day, Eleanor felt almost smug. The shelter held. The fire drew smoke up through the natural chimneys she'd discovered in the rock. Outside, the world dissolved into gray chaos, but inside she was dry and warm. Ash pressed against her, nervous but trusting. On the second day, Eleanor saw the dark stains spreading across the floor near the entrance. The ground had reached saturation. Her carefully dug channel had overflowed. Water was finding new paths, and one of those paths led directly into her home. Cold panic seized her throat. Everything she'd built, all the work, the careful planning, it could all flood, collapse, bury her. Eleanor grabbed the spade and pushed through the canvas into hell. The rain hit like fists. Wind tore at her clothes. Her hair tried to push her back into the shelter. She could barely see 3 feet ahead. The world had become water and darkness and the scream of the storm. She started digging, not carefully, not with precision, with desperation. A new channel deeper angled to catch the overflow before it reached her threshold. The mud fought her, heavy, clinging, alive with malice. Her hand slipped on the wet handle. The spade stuck. She abandoned it, dug with her bare hands, scooping mud and rock, building a crude berm to redirect the flood. Ash barked from the entrance, a rare sound, sharp with worry. Eleanor worked through the night. Her world contracted to the simple, brutal physics of water and earth. She lost track of time, lost track of everything except the desperate need to protect what she'd made. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the flooded landscape in stark white flashes. Thunder followed so close it shook the ground. Eleanor kept digging, kept moving. Mud kept fighting. Her fingers bled. Her shoulders screamed. Her lungs burned with the effort of breathing through the rain. This was the test. This was where she'd either prove William right or prove everyone else right, where she'd either survive or become another cautionary tale about women who thought they could make it alone. When dawn finally broke gray and exhausted, the rain had gentled to a drizzle. Eleanor stood swaying in her new channel, watching water flow around her shelter instead of into it. One corner of her storage nook had flooded, ruining dried herbs and a small cache of roots. But the main chamber was safe. The fire pit was dry. She had held the line. Eleanor stumbled back inside and collapsed onto her bed of pine boughs, too exhausted to even remove her mud-caked clothes. Ash immediately came to her, licking the rain and mud from her face with steady, loving strokes. She'd lost some of her winter stores, a painful setback. But lying there, feeling the warmth of the pine beside her, sensing the solid walls of earth she'd carved with her own hands, Eleanor felt something profound. Victory. The land had tested her with its first real challenge, and she was still here. "We did it," she whispered to Ash, her voice cracking. "We survived." The dog pressed closer, and Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, letting herself feel the full weight of what she'd accomplished. She'd taken a betrayal, a death, and 20 silver dollars and turned them into something that could withstand a Montana storm. This was only the beginning. She knew that. Harder tests would come. Winter waited just beyond the horizon, and with it challenges she could barely imagine. But tonight in her shelter, carved from the earth with a body warm at her side and a fire still burning in the hearth, Eleanor Hayes allowed herself to believe in something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Not the naive hope of easy answers, but the hard-earned hope of a woman who'd looked at impossible odds and decided they didn't apply to her. The hope of someone who discovered that survival wasn't about what you had, but what you refused to give up. Outside, the storm's last whispers faded into silence. Inside, Eleanor closed her eyes and slept the sleep of the victorious. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new battles against the elements and circumstance. But tonight she'd won, and that was enough. In the days following the storm, Eleanor took stock. The flooding had taught her valuable lessons about water management and the importance of multiple backup systems. She spent a week improving her drainage, building secondary channels, reinforcing weak points in her shelter's design. The work was familiar now, almost meditative. Her hands knew the weight of the spade, the resistance of different soil types, the angle needed to pry a stubborn rock free. She'd become fluent in the language of earth and stone. By early October, her shelter had evolved into something approaching comfortable. She'd dug a small alcove for storage, keeping it elevated and dry. She'd improved the chimney, making it draw better. She'd even fashioned a rough bench from a fallen log, giving herself a place to sit that wasn't the ground. But comfort had a price. The loss of her winter stores gnawed at Eleanor like hunger itself. Survival wasn't enough anymore. She needed income. The $20 had shrunk to less than $3. 2 more trips to Warren's for flour salt and a new cooking pot had consumed most of what remained. Maybe 1 more trip to town. Maybe 2 if she starved herself. The answer, she realized, lay in the piles of red clay she'd excavated. Worthless to most, a nuisance, but when left in the sun it hardened almost to stone. Eleanor remembered seeing men make bricks near a settlement once. Clay mixed with straw, fired in a kiln. She had no straw, no kiln, but she had clay in abundance, and she had William's voice in her memory. The earth provides. Her first attempts were disasters. She formed 12 blocks by hand, smoothed them as best she could, and left them to bake in the September sun. They cracked within hours, crumbling to dust at her touch. She tried again, mixing in dried grass. The bricks held their shape longer, but shattered when she tapped them with her spade, brittle as old bones. She built a small fire and arranged the bricks around it, hoping heat would strengthen them. They blackened and split with sharp cracks that made Ash jump. Each failure consumed precious firewood and irreplaceable time. For 5 days, Eleanor fought the clay and lost. She'd sit beside the pile of broken attempts, feeling despair creep in like cold water. Maybe they were right. Maybe a woman alone couldn't do this. Maybe survival was all she could hope for, and even that wouldn't last through winter. The doubts came at night when the fire burned low and the darkness pressed close. She'd lie awake calculating how long her remaining money would last, how many meals she could skip, How cold it would get before her body simply gave up. She thought about Philadelphia, about Mary's apartment, about the shame of returning defeated. But then she'd remember William's letter, the limestone, the spring, the promise that the earth would provide. She tried everything she could think of, wetting the clay more, drying it less, adding sand, adding more grass, building the fire hotter, banking it cooler. Each variation produced the same result: cracked, crumbling failures. On the fifth night, Eleanor sat surrounded by the wreckage of her experiments. 67 broken bricks, nearly a week of firewood consumed, her hands raw and bleeding from the work. "I can't do this," she whispered to the darkness. It was the first time she'd said it aloud, the first time she'd let herself admit the possibility of failure. Ash whined and pressed his nose into her hand. "What am I doing wrong?" She picked up one of the broken bricks, studying it in the firelight. "There has to be something I'm missing. William wouldn't have told me about the clay if it was impossible." She turned the fragment over and over, feeling its texture, its weight. The surface was rough, porous. It absorbed water too quickly, cracked as it dried unevenly. The grass fibers created weak points instead of reinforcement. And then she remembered William's letter. "The limestone will make your bricks stronger than any in the territory." Not the clay alone, the limestone. On the sixth day, while chipping away at the rock face in the back corner of her shelter, the spade struck something different, a seam of soft, chalky stone. Eleanor dropped to her knees, scraping away the covering clay. Limestone, a thick vein of it, exactly where William had said it would be. She sat back, understanding flooding through her. William hadn't just told her about the limestone. He'd expected her to use it. She remembered reading somewhere about lime being mixed into mortar. What if it could strengthen clay? Eleanor spent the afternoon pulverizing the soft stone with a heavy river rock, grinding it to fine white powder. Her arms burned with the effort, but she didn't stop. When she had enough, she mixed a small amount into wet clay, kneading it thoroughly, feeling how the texture changed. More cohesive, denser. The mixture felt different in her hands, live somehow, responsive. She worked it carefully, testing ratios, adjusting proportions. Too much limestone and the clay became crumbly. Too little and nothing changed. But somewhere in the middle there was a sweet spot where the two materials became something greater than their parts. She formed 6 new bricks, working carefully this time, smoothing the surfaces, setting them in the sun with something she hadn't felt in days: hope. While they dried, Eleanor built a proper kiln. She used loose stones and clay as mortar, constructing a small oven structure against a sheer rock wall. The work took 2 full days. When it was done, she placed her 6 bricks inside, built a slow, steady fire, and sealed the entrance. For 48 hours, she kept the fire burning, feeding it, watching it, not knowing if she was creating something useful or just wasting more fuel and time. She rationed her wood carefully, understanding that every piece she burned for this experiment was a piece she wouldn't have for cooking or warmth. Ash kept her company, seeming to sense the importance of this trial. The dog would lie near the kiln, watching the smoke rise, occasionally glancing at Eleanor as if to offer encouragement. On the third morning, she let the kiln cool. Her hands trembled as she dismantled the entrance. The bricks inside were warped, uneven, ugly as sin, but when she lifted one out and tapped it with her spade, it rang. A clear, solid tone, like a bell. She struck it harder. It held. Eleanor laughed, a sound so unexpected that Ash's ears perked up in confusion. She laughed until tears ran down her face, holding that ugly, beautiful brick like it was made of gold. "William," she whispered, "you knew. You left me the formula." She had done it, created something from nothing, turned dirt into stone. A week later, Eleanor loaded 6 bricks into a sack and made the long walk to Mercy Falls. She walked straight into Warren's mercantile, ignoring the stairs, and placed them on the counter. Mr. Warren picked one up, weighing it in his hand. His face betrayed nothing. "They're ugly, Mrs. Hayes." "Are they strong?" Warren studied her for a long moment. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a small hammer. He gave the brick a solid rap. It held. He hit it harder. Still solid. A slow nod. "Good for hearths. Foundations. I'll give you 10 cents each." 60 cents. A pittance, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. More than charity. It was earned. I'll bring more in 2 weeks. Eleanor walked out of that mercantile with her head high. She'd just become a businesswoman. Over the following weeks, Eleanor refined her process, built a larger, more efficient kiln, perfected the ratio of limestone to clay. Every 2 weeks, she appeared in Mercy Falls with 15 to 20 bricks. Every 2 weeks, Warren bought them all. She learned the subtleties of the craft, how weather affected drying time, how different clay deposits required different limestone ratios, how to shape the bricks for maximum strength. Her hands developed new calluses, new scars, new capabilities. The transactions were brief professional, no pity in Warren's eyes, no condescension, just business, and slowly, grudgingly, respect. Strongest bricks in the territory, she heard him tell a customer once. Made by that widow out on the Hayes claim. Eleanor's hands became permanently stained, red from the clay, white from the limestone dust. Her fingernails were broken and black, but her coin cash grew hidden in a tin box buried beneath a marked stone. She was no longer dependent on anyone's charity, but her success made the town uncomfortable. The story of the helpless widow had been easy to digest. Eleanor Hayes' self-sufficient and thriving was harder to swallow. It challenged assumptions, made people question their own choices. The whispers started small. She must have found William's hidden money. No woman could manage otherwise. Then darker. I heard she's got a man out there helping her. Probably not proper. And darkest. Running moonshine, I'd wager. Bricks are just a cover. The rumors were a way to shrink her accomplishments back to comprehensible size, to explain away what threatened their worldview. Eleanor heard the whispers, ignored them, until they turned into action. One morning in late October, she walked to her main clay pit and found it fouled. Someone had dumped cattle dung throughout the deposit, a week's worth of digging to clean it out. She said nothing, found a new source hidden deeper in the scrub oak. A week later, all eight of her snares were destroyed. Cut wires, smashed toggles, a dead rabbit left as a message. She set new traps farther from common paths concealed with greater care. Then one night sounds woke her. Footsteps, the scrape of tools. Eleanor grabbed William's old knife and pushed through the canvas with ash at her heels. Two men were demolishing her kiln in the darkness. A week's worth of bricks shattered, the carefully built structure reduced to rubble. "Get off my land." They turned surprised she'd come out. One laughed. "Awful lot to spirit for a woman alone." "Where's that gonna get you?" Eleanor stood, her ground knife in hand. Ash growled deep and threatening. The dog might be old, but he had teeth. The men exchanged glances. They hadn't expected resistance. Hadn't expected the dog. They'd been sent to intimidate, not to fight. "This ain't over," one muttered. They left, but their message was clear. Someone wanted her gone. Eleanor knew who. She'd seen the boot prints in the mud, heading back toward the Blackwood Ranch. Mr. Blackwood had discovered Clayton's deception. Discovered he'd paid $320 for land he couldn't legally own. And now he wanted it not just for the purchase price, but for what it represented. He'd been cheated. And Eleanor was the only one he could punish for it. She didn't sleep that night. By lantern light, she began building, not just repairs, defenses. A low stone wall around her shelter and the path to her spring. Tripwires strung with warning bells made from scrap metal. A second hidden kiln for backup. She was preparing for war. The first snow came as a dusting that melted by noon. But Eleanor read the warning in the air, felt it in her bones. A bad winter was coming. She doubled her efforts, cut and stacked firewood until her back screamed, smoked every scrap of meat she could trap or trade for, made bricks and sold them buying supplies while she still could. Late November brought the real warning. The sky turned an unnatural blue-gray like a bruise forming on the world's face. The wind shifted north and carried a metallic cold that bit through every layer. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in 3 hours. Old-timers in Mercy Falls knew what it meant. A big storm was building. Eleanor had 24 hours. She hauled in enough wood for 2 months, stacking it inside until the shelter was half full. Sealed every gap with clay. Filled every container with water. Checked her stores of dried meat, herbs, flour, salt. She knew she'd be sealed in for days, maybe longer. The blizzard announced itself with wind. Not a breeze, not even a gale. A roar like the earth itself was screaming. Then came the snow, not falling, but hurled horizontally by 60-mile winds. The world disappeared into white chaos within minutes. Eleanor and Ash retreated into the shelter. She secured the wooden door she'd built to replace the canvas, wedged it tight, and lit the fire. Outside, the world ended. Inside, they waited. The sound was terrifying, wind howling like wounded animals, the massive cottonwood trunk groaning under the weight of accumulating snow. Occasional cracks like rifle shots when ice-laden branches broke somewhere in the distance. Eleanor kept the fire small, rationing fuel, ate sparingly. One meal a day, no more. The darkness was nearly total, broken only by the dim glow of flames. She lost track of time. Day blended into night, blended into day again. On the third morning, the wind stopped. The sudden silence was more frightening than the noise had been. Eleanor tried to push the door open. It wouldn't budge. Not an inch. Snow had buried the entrance completely. They were trapped. For the first time since she'd started this fight, real fear gripped Eleanor's throat. They could suffocate, or freeze when the firewood ran out, or simply waste away, buried alive, and no one would know until spring thaw revealed their bodies. Ash whined softly, sensing her terror. Eleanor forced herself to breathe. Think. The chimney still drew smoke, which meant air was getting in somewhere. The snow was actually insulating, holding warmth inside. The shelter had been designed for this, whether she'd known it or not. She had to trust what she'd built. On the fourth day, she fell into a rhythm. Tend the fire, eat a small meal, tell stories to Ash about William, about Philadelphia, about the future she was building. Talking kept her sane, kept the crushing darkness at bay. She told Ash about meeting William at a church social, about how he'd been awkward and earnest, talking about his dreams of the frontier, while all the other young men talked about city jobs and social climbing, about how she'd fallen for his vision of something bigger, something bolder. She told the dog about their wedding, small and simple, about the journey west, scary and thrilling, about learning to cook over an open fire, to mend clothes by candlelight, to make a home in a one-room cabin William had built with his own hands. And she told Ash about the cough, how it had started small, how it had grown, how she'd watched William fade, unable to stop it, unable to save him. Talking released something in her, grief she'd been holding tight because she needed to be strong. But here, buried in snow with only a dog to hear, she could finally let it out. On the fourth night, or what Eleanor thought was the fourth night, time had become fluid in the darkness. She woke, convinced she heard William's voice. "Ellie, wake up. The fire's dying." She jerked upright, heart pounding. The fire had died down to barely glowing embers. If she'd slept much longer, it would have gone out completely. And in this cold, with the entrance buried, she might not have been able to restart it. "William," she whispered into the darkness. Only Ash's breathing answered. But she could have sworn she'd heard him, that voice, gentle and urgent, that had woken her so many times during their marriage, when he'd noticed something she'd missed. She fed the fire, carefully watching flames lick back to life, sat there shivering, wrapped in every layer she owned, and let herself remember. Their wedding night. William had been so nervous, he'd knocked over the water pitcher. They'd both laughed, and the tension had broken. "I promise I'll be better at the important things," he'd said. "Building our life, protecting you, making you happy." "You already make me happy," she'd told him. And it had been true. For 3 years it had been true. Their first Montana winter, huddled together in the tiny cabin, listening to the wind howl. William reading to her by firelight from the one book they owned, a collection of poems. His voice steady and warm, making beauty out of the harsh world outside. The day he'd shown her how to shoot a rifle. How patient he'd been when she flinched at the noise. How proud when she finally hit the target. "You're stronger than you think, Ellie. You just need to believe it." The last coherent conversation they'd had a week before he died. He'd gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you won't give up. Promise me you'll fight. You're going to be fine, Ellie. Better than fine. You're going to show them all." Now she sat alone in a hole in the ground, and he was gone, and she was keeping his promise instead of him keeping his. Building their life. Except it was just her life now. The thought should have brought tears. But Eleanor found she had none left. Just a cold, hard determination. She would survive this. For William, for the promise she'd made. for the sheer stubborn refusal to let the land win. On the fifth morning, complete silence greeted her. Eleanor began to dig, using a cooking pot, her bare hands, anything that could move snow. Ash helped pawing and scrabbling, 3 hours of desperate work. When she finally broke through, the brightness was blinding. Snow, 5 feet deep, covered everything. The landscape had been transformed into an alien world of white dunes and drifts. Eleanor pulled herself out, Ash scrambling after her. The cold bit instantly, but the air was clean and sharp and alive. She needed to check on the town. Needed supplies. The 6 mile journey took 8 hours, wading through waist-deep drifts, carrying Ash across the deepest sections. By the time she reached Mercy Falls, every muscle screamed and her lungs burned with cold. The devastation was stunning. The livery roof had collapsed, crushing 3 horses. 5 small cabins on the outskirts were flattened. 7 people dead. 2 prospectors frozen in their tent. 3 elderly folks in a cabin without enough heat. 2 cowboys caught on the trail. But Eleanor's shelter, the hole in the ground everyone had mocked, stood firm. More than firm. Perfect. Warren stepped out of the mercantile as she stood in the town square, taking in the destruction. "Mrs. Hayes, good to see you made it." He paused, something shifting in his weathered face. "Your spring is the only water source not frozen solid for 20 miles. Even the town well cracked. That land of yours turns out to be more valuable than anyone thought." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. William had known. The spring fed by a deep aquifer would never freeze. In a land where water meant life, she owned something precious. The story spread faster than the blizzard had. The widow in the ground, who'd survived when strong men died. Her shelter hadn't just held. It had protected her perfectly, while buildings above ground failed. People began looking at her differently. Not with pity, with respect. And 50 miles north, in his large ranch house, Mr. Blackwood heard the news and understood. The land he'd thought worthless, that he'd been cheated on, was actually valuable. The spring alone was worth a fortune. He'd offered Eleanor reasonable terms. She'd refused. That would have to change. A week after the blizzard, Blackwood came himself. 3 riders with him, all armed, not for shooting, but for intimidation. He was 55, silver-haired, dressed impeccably, even for a frontier visit. Eleanor stood at her stone wall, Ash at her side, growling low in his chest. "Mrs. Hayes." Blackwood's smile was practiced, pleasant, predatory. "Remarkable what you've accomplished here. Truly astounding for a woman alone." He dismounted, pulled a leather pouch from his saddlebag, set it on a flat rock. $500 in gold, enough to start over anywhere. Philadelphia, perhaps, a comfortable life. Eleanor didn't touch the pouch. "This land is mine, I'm not selling." The smile tightened. "Be reasonable. Winter's not over. Accidents happen out here. Springs can get contaminated, fences break. Would be a shame to see it all this hard work wasted." He let the threat hang in the frozen air. "And there's the matter of the deed. Clayton sold me this land. You're squatting on my property." "Show me your deed, Mr. Blackwood." Eleanor's voice was ice. "Because I have mine, filed legally with the county. Your dispute is with Clayton Hayes, not me." Blackwood's face flushed red. Nobody told him no, especially not a woman. "We'll see about that, Mrs. Hayes. The county recorder might have different opinions about a woman's claim." He mounted his horse, movements stiff with anger. "I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits." They rode away, leaving the pouch of gold on the rock. A test. Temptation. Eleanor picked it up and hurled it after them. The pouch burst open in the snow, gold coins scattering like fallen stars. Ash barked approval, the sound echoing across the white wilderness. Eleanor stood watching until they disappeared. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. She'd just declared war on the most powerful man in the territory, and she'd done it alone. But maybe, she thought, remembering Warren's respectful nod and the changed whispers in town, not entirely alone anymore. Winter deepened, but Eleanor had won a crucial psychological battle. Blackwood's threat had forced her to confront her own strength, and she'd found it was greater than she'd imagined. The word spread through Mercy Falls like smoke through timber. One of Blackwood's riders had made the mistake of bragging too loud in Warren's mercantile. That widow squatting on Mr. Blackwood's land needs to move along. He paid good money for that claim. Woman's got no right. Warren stopped arranging tins on the shelf, set them down with deliberate care, turned to face the room full of customers. Mrs. Hayes has legal deed to that land, filed and recorded proper. If Mr. Blackwood has issues, he should take them up with Clayton Hayes, who sold him property he didn't own. The mercantile went quiet. Warren didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Everyone knew his word carried weight. A homesteader spoke up. She survived that blizzard, made the strongest bricks I ever used. Woman's earned her place. Another voice joined. Blackwood's got enough land, 20,000 acres. Let the widow keep hers. The rider left without his purchases. Eleanor heard about it from Sarah Miller, a homesteader's wife who'd come to learn brickmaking. Mr. Warren stood up for you in front of half the town, Sarah said, kneading clay beside Eleanor. People are talking different now. Not about the poor widow, about the brickmaker, the survivor. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Recognition. Not as someone to be pitied, but as someone who'd proven herself. That evening, Warren rode out to her land, first time he'd ever made the journey. He sat his horse awkwardly, clearly more comfortable behind a counter than in a saddle. Mrs. Hayes, I came to warn you. Blackwood will try the legal route now. You'll need your papers in order. There's a lawyer in Helena, Silas Cooper, honest man. I can write you an introduction. Eleanor studied him. Why are you helping me? Warren was quiet for a long moment. My wife died 3 years back. Cancer. People told me to sell the store, move to the city, start fresh. He looked out over her land, the stone walls, the smoke rising from her kiln. But that store was ours. I kept it, made it bigger, more successful. His eyes met hers. I understand not giving up on what's yours. 2 weeks later, Eleanor made the journey to Helena. The city felt strange after months of solitude. Too many people, too much noise. But Silas Cooper's office was a haven of quiet order. Cooper was 45, graying with the careful manner of someone who'd seen law bent too many times. He examined her deed, her tax receipts, the photographs she'd had taken of her improvements. Your claim is legally sound, he said finally, but Mrs. Hayes Blackwood has money and connections. He'll look for any angle. Claim you abandoned the property, failed to improve it, violated some obscure ordinance. Cooper leaned forward. Document everything. Get testimonials from customers. Proof of continuous occupation. Make it impossible for any judge to question your legitimacy. Eleanor spent the next weeks gathering evidence. Statements from Warren about her brick sales, letters from homesteaders she'd advised, photographs of her shelter, her kiln, her water systems. She was building a different kind of wall now. One made of paper and ink in irrefutable truth. But Blackwood wasn't waiting for court. In February, Eleanor discovered one of her clay pits had been salted. Deliberate contamination that would ruin any bricks made from it. The same week her tripwires were cut, the bells stolen, then came the legal harassment. A notice appeared at the mercantile. Eleanor Hayes owed back taxes on her property. A lie. She'd paid every cent. But it meant a trip to Helena, wasted time, and the cost of filing counter documentation. Blackwood was grinding her down. Death by 1,000 cuts. The final provocation came on a frozen March night. Ash woke Eleanor with frantic barking, a sound so rare it brought her instantly alert. She grabbed the old rifle she'd bought and pushed outside. 2 men stood near her spring. Between them, a dead goat, visibly diseased pustules covering its skin. They were preparing to throw it in, contaminate her water supply. Get off my land. They turned startled but not afraid. One laughed. Or what? You'll shoot us. You don't have the nerve, woman. Eleanor raised the rifle and fired into the air. The shot cracked across the frozen landscape like judgment itself. Next one won't be a warning. This is my land, legally mine. I will defend it. Ash charged forward, teeth bared. One man reached for his belt. The dog's jaws clamped onto his boot, and he stumbled backward, cursing. Then Eleanor heard it. Hoofbeats. Warren appeared from the darkness with 3 men from town. They'd been watching, waiting, ready to bear witness. We heard the shot, Mrs. Hayes. Everything all right here? Warren's eyes took in the dead goat, the men, the situation. Trying to poison her water supply. That's attempted murder. Sheriff will want to know about this. The men mounted and rode off. Blackwood's hired hands caught in the act. Warren stayed until dawn, him and the others drinking coffee, Eleanor made standing guard. When they left, Warren clasped her hand briefly. "You're not alone in this fight, Mrs. Hayes. Remember that." April brought mud and the first pale shoots of grass. It also brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was working the kiln when she heard a horse approach. She turned a hand automatically going to the rifle always nearby now. The rider was thin-bearded, dressed in clothes that had seen too many hard miles. When he removed his hat, she knew him. Clayton. He dismounted slowly like a man approaching a dangerous animal, which Eleanor supposed he was. "Eleanor, I came to make things right." She said nothing, just waited. "What I did, selling William's land, keeping the money, leaving you with nothing." His voice cracked. "It's eaten at me, every day." He told his story. Business failures, debts, desperation. "I was a coward. I took the easy way, and I destroyed your life." He held out an envelope. $80, everything I could save. "I know it's not enough, but..." Clayton looked around, seeing the shelter, the walls, the kiln, the evidence of what she'd built. "My God, you actually made something here. William would be so proud." Eleanor felt anger and pity war inside her. "You gave me $20 and left me to die, Clayton." "I know, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." She could see it was genuine, but sorry didn't erase those first desperate months. Didn't erase the fear, the hunger, the nights wondering if she'd survive. "I don't want your money, Clayton, but I need your help." She explained about Blackwood, the lawsuit, the hearing scheduled for late April in Helena. "You sold him land you didn't own. You need to testify. Admit what you did. Clear the legal record." Clayton went pale. "Blackwood will sue me. Maybe worse." "Yes, that's the price of making this right." Eleanor watched him wrestle with his conscience, watched him measure his comfort against her survival. It took a long minute. "All right, I'll testify. It's the least I owe you." That night they sat by her fire, not quite reconciled but no longer enemies. Clayton studied the shelter he'd assumed would be her grave. "I thought you'd be dead within a month. Thought I was doing you a favor pushing you toward Philadelphia. You underestimated me. Everyone did. William didn't. He always said you were the strongest person he knew." Clayton's eyes were distant. "I see it now. I'm sorry it took me so long." Eleanor didn't forgive. Not entirely, but she accepted his help. Sometimes that was enough. The Helena courthouse stood imposing in spring sunlight. Eleanor arrived with Cooper Warren, Sarah Miller, and Clayton. Her small army. Blackwood had 3 lawyers and a parade of witnesses. Men who'd seen the money change hands. Papers on. It looked damning. His lead lawyer presented the case with practiced smoothness. "Mr. Blackwood purchased 300 acres in good faith for $320 cash. Mrs. Hayes is illegally occupying his property." Then it was their turn. Cooper called Clayton to the stand. The courtroom held its breath. "Mr. Hayes, did you sell land to Mr. Blackwood?" "Yes." "Did you own that land?" Clayton stopped, swallowed hard. "No, the land belonged to my late brother William. The deed passed to his widow Eleanor Hayes upon his death." Blackwood's lawyers erupted. "Witness is clearly coerced." The judge, a severe woman named Margaret Hartley, rapped her gavel. "Overruled. Continue." Clayton told everything, his desperation, the fraud, how he'd kept $300 and given Eleanor 20. "I defrauded both Mr. Blackwood and my sister-in-law. The guilt has haunted me every day since." The courtroom buzzed. Eleanor felt the tide shifting. Cooper called her next. She walked to the stand in her best dress, which was still plain black wool. Her hands, despite scrubbing, still bore the stains of her work. Red clay, white limestone. The permanent marks of her trade. Cooper led her through it. 7 months of continuous occupation. The shelter, the water systems, the kiln, the brick business. She presented her evidence methodically. Photographs, testimonials, tax receipts, samples of her bricks. "I've improved the land as required by homestead law. I've built a business. I pay my taxes. This is my legal home." Blackwood's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Tall, sharp-faced, confident. "Mrs. Hayes, isn't it true you live in a hole in the ground, like some kind of animal?" The courtroom stirred. Eleanor met his eyes without flinching. "I live in a shelter I built with my own hands from the earth itself. It protected me through the worst blizzard in 20 years. A storm that killed 7 people in Mercy Falls, while I remain safe and warm. It's not a mansion, but it's solid, functional, and mine. Someone in the gallery muttered approval. Judge Hartley's expression didn't change, but Eleanor thought she saw something flicker in those stern eyes. Warren testified next. Mrs. Hayes is one of my most reliable suppliers. Her bricks are superior quality. I sell every one she produces. She's proven herself a capable homesteader and businesswoman. She's earned respect through merit, not charity. Sarah Miller followed. Mrs. Hayes has taught myself and 3 other women her brickmaking techniques. She shares her knowledge freely. She's become a valued member of our community. Then Cooper played his final card. Your Honor, I submit a geological survey conducted last month. He presented the report. The spring on Mrs. Hayes' property is fed by a deep aquifer. It's one of only 3 year-round, never-freezing water sources within 30 miles. During the recent blizzard, when every other water source failed, Mrs. Hayes' spring provided emergency water to travelers. She has improved this land beyond anyone's initial estimation of its value. Blackwood's face darkened. He hadn't known about the geological survey, hadn't realized just how valuable the land had become. Judge Hartley reviewed the documents for 20 silent minutes. The courtroom barely breathed. Finally, she looked up. The deed is clear and legally filed. Eleanor Hayes is the rightful owner of the property in question. Mr. Blackwood's claim is denied. She turned to Clayton. Mr. Hayes, you are ordered to return the $320 to Mr. Blackwood as restitution for fraud. Payment plan acceptable, given your apparent financial situation. The gavel fell. Final. Eleanor closed her eyes. The relief was physical, weakening her knees. Warren gripped her elbow, steadying her. Sarah hugged her. Cooper allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Outside the courthouse, Blackwood approached. His face was stone, but his eyes held grudging acknowledgement. You won today, Mrs. Hayes, legally, but land is more than paper. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Blackwood. Eleanor met his gaze. Land is exactly paper when that paper is backed by law and community. I have both now. She walked away, leaving him standing there. A powerful man diminished by a woman who refused to be moved. They walked to the hotel where Eleanor had stayed the night before. Warren had insisted on paying for the room, and for once she'd let him. In the small dining room over coffee and pie Sarah had ordered to celebrate, they sat in companionable silence for a long moment. You know what this means, don't you? Cooper finally said, setting down his cup. You've set a precedent. There'll be other widows, other women who'll point to this case. You've made it easier for them. Eleanor hadn't thought of it that way. She'd been so focused on saving her own land that she hadn't considered the broader implications. Good, she said simply. Warren smiled. You've also made an enemy. Blackwood isn't the forgiving type. I know, but he can't touch me now, not legally. No, Sarah agreed, but you should still be careful. Eleanor thought about the stone walls around her shelter, the rifle she'd learned to shoot, the tripwires and warning bells, the network of people who now watched out for her. I will be, she promised, but I won't live in fear, not after coming this far. Clayton spoke up, hesitant. Eleanor, I meant what I said. I want to make amends, not just the money to Blackwood. To you. If there's anything you need, Eleanor considered. There is one thing. Help me build a proper roof over my kiln, something that'll let me work through winter. I'll pay you fair wages. Clayton's eyes lit up. I'd be honored. No payment needed. Fair wages, Eleanor repeated firmly. I pay my debts and I pay for honest work. That's how this works. He nodded, understanding. This was her extending something more valuable than forgiveness, a chance to earn back his dignity through honest labor. May transformed Montana from the white to green almost overnight. Eleanor planted her first garden. Vegetables, herbs, wildflowers William had loved. Each seed a promise of permanence. Her brick business flourished. She hired young Michael Carson, 19, whose father had died in the blizzard. She taught him the craft, paid him fair wages. He was loyal, hardworking, saw her as the mentor he'd lost. The shelter evolved. Eleanor added a second chamber for storage, built a real work table, installed shelves for the books she was starting to collect, whitewashed the walls with lime. The earthen home that had started as survival became something more, a place of comfort, of pride. Sarah and other women came regularly to learn. Eleanor taught freely. Knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. Pass it on. Homesteaders sought her advice on drainage construction, water management. She became an informal consultant, her expertise recognized and respected. Warren's friendship deepened into something lasting. Not romance, both still carried their grief, but understanding, trust. They played chess weekly at the Mercantile, discussed books, shared stories of their lost spouses without the weight of expectation. One evening over their chessboard, Warren said, "You know, when you first came to town, I gave you a month before you'd head back east. I've never been happier to be wrong." Eleanor moved her knight. "Neither have I." Ash grew older slower. His muzzle went fully gray, but his eyes still held contentment. On warm afternoons, he'd lie in the sun while Eleanor worked, and she'd pause to scratch his ears. "You saved my life, old friend, not just from cold or hunger, from giving up, from loneliness." The dog's tail would thump acknowledgement. He'd found his home. So had she. A homesteader named Frank Morrison started showing interest. Decent man, respectful, not pushy. He'd buy bricks, stay to talk, offer help with heavy work. Sarah noticed. "He's a good man, Eleanor. Companionship wouldn't be terrible." Eleanor considered it honestly. "Maybe someday, but right now, I'm happy. Truly happy. I built this life myself. I'm not ready to share it yet." She realized with surprise that she meant it. She didn't need a man to complete her. She was whole on her own. Summer evenings became Eleanor's favorite time. She'd sit at the entrance of her home, the stone walls surrounding it like protective arms. The garden grew lush. The kiln smoked with new production. Michael would clean up, call goodnight, head back to town. And Eleanor would sit with Ash watching the sun paint the rocks in shades of orange and gold. She'd pull out William's photograph sometimes along with his worn letter. "I did it. I kept the land, built something that lasts." She traced the faded ink. "You knew I'd need more than just dirt and rock. You gave me knowledge, purpose, a reason to fight." She thought about that first night in the pit, reading his letter by firelight, not understanding the full weight of his gift. Now she did. The limestone, the spring, the clay. But more than that, the belief that she could do this, that she was strong enough. "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see in myself, William." She thought about the journey, 7 months that had transformed her from a grieving widow into something else entirely. The brickmaker, the earth keeper, the woman who had taken $20 and worthless land and built an empire. Not an empire of money, though she had that now. Not an empire of land, though 300 acres were legally hers. An empire of self, of capability, of the quiet knowledge that she could face anything and survive it. The deed Warren saw from handling remained in her pocket. Eleanor Hayes, sole owner of 300 acres. Those words meant more than property. They meant freedom, self-determination, proof that a woman alone could not just survive, but thrive. "This wasn't the life I imagined," she said to the coming darkness. "When William and I married, I thought we'd build a cabin together, raise children, grow old side by side." She paused, feeling the truth of what came next. "But this life, the one I carved from grief and dirt, and well, it's mine in a way nothing else ever was. I'm not someone's daughter or wife or dependent. I'm Eleanor Hayes, the brickmaker, the survivor, the woman who proved them all wrong." Inside the shelter, she lit her lantern. Warm light spilled into the twilight, a beacon in the wilderness, evidence of human persistence. Eleanor stood, brushed dust from her skirt. Ash followed her inside. She secured the wooden door, solid and well-fitted. Inside waited warmth, a simple meal, books to read, plans to make. Outside, darkness claimed the Montana wilderness. Stars emerged ancient and indifferent. The land stretched vast and hard in all directions. But in Eleanor's shelter, in the home she dug from the earth itself, light burned steady. Not just firelight, not just lantern glow, something else. The light of a woman who'd faced impossible odds and decided they didn't apply. She'd been given $20 and a broken promise. She'd turned them into a business, a home, a life of dignity and purpose. The earth had tested her with storms and sabotage, with isolation and doubt. She'd answered with brick and mortar, with stubborn persistence, with the simple refusal to be defeated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Winter would come again. The land would always be hard. But tonight, Eleanor Hayes sat in the home she'd built with a dog at her feet and a future she'd earned and felt something she'd thought lost forever. Peace. Not the peace of easy living, but the deep, bone-settled peace of someone who knows exactly who they are and what they're worth. The lantern flickered. Eleanor adjusted the wick. The light grew steady again, pushing back the dark, warming the stone walls that would stand for generations. Eleanor set William's photograph on the shelf beside her growing collection of books. Outside, the first stars appeared over the Montana wilderness. Inside, Ash snored softly by the fire paws, twitching in dreams of rabbits in endless fields. She ran her hand along the smooth clay wall she'd built, felt the solidity of earth and lime and will. Tomorrow, Michael would arrive early. They had an order for 50 bricks, a schoolhouse being built 2 towns over. Her first major contract. But tonight, Eleanor Hayes simply sat in the warm glow of her lantern, in the home she'd carved from impossible odds, and felt what she'd earned through every blister, every frozen night, every moment she'd refused to break. Not just survival, not just independence, victory, complete undeniable hers.